Alrighty, gang. Hello. As mentioned previously, this is one of two final videos of content for this semester. And I'm going to be just briefly talking about the first chapter and the concluding chapter, but mostly the first chapter of this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Kahneman? I think it's Kahneman. This book's gotten a lot of praise. I see from different quarters on podcasts, articles, people talking about this book. A lot of people are aware of this book. It's got a broad reach, and it's thought to be a pretty, at this point, canonical read, and important and definitive kind of statement about our minds, our brains, how they work, how we react to the world, how we process information. And to be honest, I've struggled with at what point in this semester should we be engaging with this reading, because it feels pretty definitive and clear. And so I decided to put it at the end when we're talking about kind of like the prescription kind of thing. Like, what should we do moving forward? We've been spending a lot of time focusing on the obstacles to rational thought, the Serious Man Project, mediational obstacles, language obstacles, obstacles of technology and influence, and just how much of what we interact with environmentally, symbolically, linguistically, technologically, how much of that stuff alters and constitutes and shapes our very thoughts and engagements with the wider world, right? But we want to finish off by thinking about, ways of doing better, ways of combating some of this stuff or adapting to it. And so this is a pretty good way of handling a lot of that stuff. It's a big, thick book, as you can see. It's like close to 500 pages. But it's actually quite readable. This is a high-level psychology researcher who's writing in a fairly accessible, popular vernacular and trying to make these ideas digestible to a very broad audience. And so if you're interested in this kind of stuff, definitely pick it up. There's a lot of really interesting insights into how our brains operate and how our systems operate, how we operate. And so I'll just plunge into the gist of these two short pieces. All the chapters are fairly quick, and the kind of basic framework for the book, and it's even in the title, Thinking Fast and Slow. There's two systems, and he's talking about, right off the bat here, the characters and the story. The story that he's telling about the human mind and how we think, cognition. There's kind of two characters that run throughout this book, and he calls them System 1 and System 2, and he says over and over again, these are kind of common handles that we use, we and psychology researchers, that we use to talk about sort of cognitive functions, and they're just kind of shorthand terms that we're very familiar with, but they're not necessarily technically, clinically accurate, right? And so he calling them characters. When he says system, and he says toward the end of the introduction here, he's like, we're not talking about a system in terms of a machine, like an actual system that's designed to operate as a whole, and it's got all these different parts to it. He's talking more about tendencies within ourselves that we can separate into these different kinds of registers. And we have a slow system and we have a quick system, right? So the two systems are the fast system and the slow system. System 1 is the fast system. System 2 is the slow system. So the first system, System 1, is about automatic processes, right? It's just what we are constantly engaging in on a low level, our intuitions, our quick reactions, right? There's a lot of emotional stuff, a lot of affect stuff that's happening there. But this is the system that sort of handles our moment-to-moment realities as we're moving through our days, right? We're driving down the road, we maybe look at our phone and we see out of the corner of our eye there's a ball bouncing coming toward us, and we just like instantly hit the brakes, pull back. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to spend any like time processing what's going on there. It just happens, right? One thing I like to brag about, I believe that I have a curse in life and I have a blessing in life. I feel like maybe we all do, like one thing that we're cursed with and one thing that we're blessed with. My curse in life is I can't choose checkout lines. Every time I choose a checkout line, it's grocery store or the line to get tickets or whatever. There's several lines. I choose that one. It's always the wrong one. There's always something that happens. Like someone will start writing with a check and then they'll have to call the person over and they'll have to call another person over and then the system crashes. It's like every line that I join, something goes wrong. That's my curse. But my blessing is I can catch anything. I have good hands. When I was a younger lad in high school and such, I used to play basketball and football. I was a good receiver. I could always catch the ball. And still to this day, if something's falling, except that one, if I don't do it myself, if I just sort of see it, I can catch it. And so I have a pretty good fast system one in terms of like hand-eye kind of reactions. So system one is automatic. It's kind of operating. It's like your computer is like always running. The clock is always running in the background. And there's all these things that are just happening without you doing anything. It's just sort of operating on this kind of low throb. Whereas the second system, system two, that's the system of attention. That's the system of focus. That's the system of reflection. That's the system of recalling from your memory banks comparisons, associations. Is this like this? Is this not like this? Right? You're drawing from your memories. You're rubbing up something against other experiences, and you're taking some time to kind of process through, right? That's the slow system, and that's the system of, reasoned, thoughtful reflection and so on, right? And so that's more or less it. He says the two systems on page 20 here, system one, system two. And he goes into some more detail about those systems, but, they're not terribly difficult. What I think is interesting about this reading here is, throughout this semester, throughout this class, we've been talking about these two characters, Serious Man and Rhetoric Man. We've been talking about them as they're kind of like two different kinds of people, right? It's like the general semanticists are trying to like prop up this Serious Man creature as this all-consuming rational figure who's always doing their very, very best to like think and reflect and pause and be very cautious. And so in that sense, it's like the system two character is operating like 100% capacity at all times. That's sort of like the Serious Man fantasy. Whereas the Rhetoric Man that we've been talking about more closely associates to system one processes, right? But that seems also kind of overblown, right? Rhetoric Man isn't just about pure impulse and pure kind of instant reactivity, although you can say that there's some of that going on, right? And so basically throughout this class, we've been looking at these two figures in kind of abbreviated, truncated versions of the thing that Kahneman's talking about here, as both of the Rhetoric Man and the Serious Man are within all of us in the form of system one and system two, right? So system one is more of the rhetorical, spontaneous, reactive, on the fly, in the moment, a little bit more emotion ridden, a little bit more affect driven. Rhetoric's kind of like up in the forefront of our thoughts and our expressions, on our perceptions and our senses, right? And then of course we get the system two, which is more about reflection and focus and study and meditation, and you can think of that as that more serious, reasonable, rational approach, right? So the big kind of tie-up here, the big contribution is that, again, both of these things are operating in all of us all the time. And so that's sort of the broad strokes there, is that the first system is about autonomous responses or automatic responses, quick reactions. There was a book that came out a few years back by Malcolm Gladwell. He's not so hot anymore, but he had a string of books that were just enormously successful and popular. And one of them, the big ones, was called Blink. And the argument that he makes in Blink is that, like, most of what we're processing in an instant. Like if we first meet someone and we just like quickly size them up, our reaction to that person, whether it's positive, negative, indifferent, is usually, he argues, like more or less, statistically speaking, sort of is generally going toward the accurate, true kind of response, right? If we see something and we feel like it's a little bit threatening or shady or, exercise caution, the blink argument is that more often than not, that response, that inclination is correct, right? And so, we often hear like, don't just make snap judgments and don't, just like trust your immediate response. The argument of blink was that, no, we can actually trust our automatic responses. There's a lot of good like conditioning that's gone into those quick responses, and they're part of our necessary human equipment, right, for just moving through the world and dealing with things that happen quickly. Information's coming at us, right? Surprise information. We've developed and we've evolved to process in the moment, on the fly, really quickly. And so we're very good at that. Our systems can do that. But it's not always right, is the thing. So blink is touching on something important, which is there's a lot of reliable instinct that sort of goes with our system one approach. But as Kahneman argued, is that we also do need system two a lot to slow down, to again reflect and kind of process and meditate on what's happening with system one. We can probably think of examples of a quick reaction gone wrong, right? You're afraid of something that you don't need to be afraid of, but you're kind of conditioned to react that way, right? So he notes on page 21 here in that first full paragraph, when we think of ourselves, we tend to identify with system two. We tend to think of ourselves, and again, this is the general semantic kind of bias, right? Is like, we are rational reasoning creatures, right? We want to think that of ourselves. I think this class has shown that more often than not, that doesn't really hold up. That there's a lot of examples of how it is that we are passionate creatures. We are creatures that respond to misinformation, to miscues, right? We are reactive, we are responsive, impulsive, and whatnot. But we tend to think of ourselves in our like more aspirational sense of like we are slow thinking, reasoning creatures, and we are, just not always. And so he says, the conscious reasoning self that has beliefs makes choices and decides what to think about and what to do. Although system two believes itself to be where the action is, the automatic system one is the hero of the book. So most of what's going on, even right now as I'm making this, I'm not super conscious of it, but I'm probably like aware of like, I'm in a casita. My office is in a casita. And the casita is like kind of outside. Like the house is over there. It's sort of attached but separate. And so the road is right there, and I'm always like hearing the sounds of cars going by and the sounds of doors slamming. I have very good, very sensitive hearing. And I hear it when my son opens the door. And so even if I'm filming a video, it's like I'm still kind of ambiently aware, And so this stuff, again, is operating. It's like a low-level operating system. It's just scanning and searching, constantly being on guard and aware of everything that's happening in case, we need a quick reaction. Especially if you have kids, I think the system's on high alert because you're like, what's he doing? What's happening? What's going on? Is he okay? Is everything fine? But the system two approach is important as a kind of slower, more reliable navigation system that we can rely on when we need to take a bit of time and think about, what makes the most sense here. Right? We can sort of pull back, slow down, and reflect. And so the kind of basic gist of this book, and there's a lot of examples of how these two different systems operate, and it's important to note a couple things, that they're not, again, actual systems. These are physiological, emotional, cognitive tendencies that are always operating simultaneously. It's not like a switch is going on and off. It's like when we're engaged in system one, system two is dead. When we're engaging in system two, system one is dead. It's not like that binary thing. They're always kind of interacting and swirling together. And system one is the more natural, common state of affairs in terms of how we're living our daily lives. And it gets a lot of things right, but it doesn't get everything right. Right? Our quick reactions can go wrong. We can have a wrong, immediate response. And so we do need to draw on System 2 when we're trying to focus, when we're trying to get something right, when we're doing a puzzle, or when we're trying to work through some kind of process, or we're trying to understand something that seems confusing, or figure out where something is. Thinking about Where's Waldo, right? Where's Waldo, those like goofy books with like, try to find the little dude with the cap, right? You really got to focus in and you have to pay attention. And as he notes early on here, that System 2 is really useful and important to sort of like provide that slower, meditative, reflective weighing of possibilities, but it also does draw on resources that, there's not an infinite supply of System 2, right? And so he says, that phrase, pay attention, is a good phrase because we do kind of pay attention. When we focus, we don't have an infinite amount of focus, right? If you have kids, if you've tried to teach a class, you've dealt with like struggles with focus. We have limited supply. I'm not sure what explains this, right? Maybe it's physiologically expensive to like use focused attention. It draws energy from somewhere else. I'm not sure. In any case, the point is like System 1 is happening a lot, getting a lot right, but not everything. System 2 kicks in when we need to kind of really sort things out and spend some time getting things accurate or more accurate. But again, System 2 is not always right. It's not that these systems are perfectly perfect or perfectly imperfect. They're doing their best, and they kind of play off of each other, and they work together. Yep. Plot synopsis on page 24. That's really good. The interaction of the two systems is a recurrent theme of the book, and a brief synopsis of the plot is in order. In this story, I will tell Systems 1 and 2 are both active whenever we are awake. System 1 runs automatically, and System 2 is normally in a comfortable low-effort mode in which only a fraction of its capacity is engaged, and so on and so on. So he's kind of laying out the general contours of these two systems here. He notes on the next page that the division of labor between these two systems is very efficient, right? It's not like they're both operating simultaneously and kind of at odds with one another. It's more of like that second system kicks in when we need it to, when we really kind of need to draw our resources of cognitive alertness to a specific task or problem or challenge or situation, to really kind of draw on our cognitive abilities to kind of work through something. And then we kind of fall back into automatic mode. Just think about how much of your daily life is just automatic. Think about from the moment you get up in the morning, what you do step by step, and how much time and actual kind of reflective thought you spend. You get up, you put your clothes on, or you go brush your teeth, hop in the shower, maybe get a bit of breakfast, head off to your car, grab your keys. How much of that are you actually thinking about? Even when you're driving, how much of that are you thinking about? So System 1 is like hugely in play until, we're in the car and we hit this big sort of traffic mess. This happens to me a lot. It's like I see the traffic coming up, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, do I continue in this line? Do I get out? Do I do a quick exit? And I'm trying to process really quickly what's the best way forward, right? And that's more of that System 2 kicking in. Now, I guess the last point I would make here is that, getting back to this business, and this is more in the conclusion here. He mostly repeats in the conclusion what he says in the introduction, but he talks about these two additional kind of figures, econ and human, the two selves. And again, the econ figure more corresponds to the serious man, System 2 kind of figure, the always rational creature of economic theory. And then, of course, you've got the human, which is more of that serious man, System 1 kind of approach, right? Biology and rationality and so on. Let's see, where are we? Econs and humans, 411 there. And he says something really interesting about rationality here. He says rationality is just logical coherence. So it can be untrue. Something can be untrue but rational. It's like you can believe in ghosts as long as all your other beliefs line up with the belief in ghosts, and then you can be considered rational. So that's interesting. He also notes that humans are not irrational. The human figure is not an irrational figure. It's just not necessarily a constantly rationalizing figure, right? So, really interesting sort of way of splitting up or realigning the stuff that we've split up. These two characters he's suggesting are at play within us at all times. And I guess the kind of the takeaway here to wrap up is that, again, we don't always engage in System 2 thinking, but we need it. And the way we can leave off here is he says, retraining our System 1 approach is not easy. But some of our System 1 approaches can go wrong, can get us into trouble. We can throw bias in there. He talks about cognitive illusions, things that we just kind of like have wrong in our heads, right? Where do they come from? Who knows? Is it just a natural kind of, we're born with these things in us? Is it conditioned socially? Does it come from our families? Does it come from the media? Hard to say, right? But we do have these kind of automatic responses where we see something and we get excited, or we see something and we pull back, right? Aversion and attraction. Most of that stuff, as he says, is pretty accurate, but it can go wrong. And the point there is sort of the takeaway is that we should try as much as possible is to draw on and to call into effect our System 2 approach if we suspect we may get into a situation where our System 1 reflexes kick in a wrong way, right? So it's more about like being aware of the kind of problem situations where I might be led into an automatic reaction that could be wrong. And so System 2 is meant to be a kind of voluntary call-up. Like we can maybe train ourselves to train ourselves. We can train ourselves to allow our System 2 to kick in and do a better job of handling System 1, right? So if we tend to go to parties with our families or friends, and we find that we make bad snap judgments about people as being a jerk or as being a this or a that, and then that gets us into problems because we act like a jerk ourselves and no one wants to be friends with us, maybe we can realize that our own System 1 approach is a little off. Something about our reaction, about our habitual reaction, about our conditioned reaction is going wrong, and we need to now more consciously bring in System 2 to try to reason things through and even kind of check ourselves, right? So that's all a labor of like individual effort in our own kind of System 1 breakdowns. And that, he says that's hard to do. It's hard to retrain System 1 or train System 1 differently, but you can do it. Think about like, I actually just went through the index in here to see if he talks about habits at all. It's weirdly, he doesn't talk about habits, but it seems to me like you can create new habits. I've done this before. I've had bad habits that I've stopped, but I've also started new habits that become bad habits. A lot of stuff around food and drink and these things, right? And I guess the last thing I would say is that, he doesn't talk too much about technology, but a lot of the research on this stuff, which we talked about a fair bit, suggests that what it does is it actually appeals these platforms, the social media platforms, the kind of information that's coming across, the kind of images, the kinds of appeals and sensations and messages, they tend to appeal more to our System 1 approach at the expense of our System 2 approaches, right? And so much of the notifications, the pop-ups, the content that's meant to kind of grab your attention, because attention's everything, right? So you can grab people's attention by showing them stuff that's shocking or exciting or arousing or frustrating or aggravating and maddening or whatever, and you get that System 1 engagement easily. And then it's all about kind of keeping that system engaged, right? Keeping the attraction, keeping the frustration, keeping the anger, keeping the vanity or the sense of tribal loyalty or whatever it might be, right? But try to avoid that System 2, like, oh, blank, I've been playing this game for the last 6 hours. I should set it aside, right? So these things are wired basically, to go after our System 1 approaches. And I would argue that we need to, that's one area that we need to try to like energize and activate our System 2 approach more so, right? As a way to like constantly be asking ourselves, is this right? Is this true? Do I believe this? What else is this connected to? What is the context here? Slowing down, asking those questions. Those are the kind of System 2 approaches, right? So I'll wrap up here, but I think that it's important that we be aware of our immediate stuff and also our ability to kind of slow down, like verify. That's a very general semantics approach. So System 2 is about verifying. It's about asking, like, is that reaction warranted? Is it the right reaction? Should I be so worked up? Should I be so aroused? Should I... So that's about it. Two systems. They're at play within all of us, not two different people, two different characters within us all. One that's doing most of the work automatically. The other one that's ready to kick in and kind of weigh things out and sort things out. And they are interrelated, and they both operate together to kind of help us just get through the world, get through our lives, right? But I would argue that we live in a technological landscape that is designed to keep System 2 asleep and to just keep that System A engaged constantly, System 1. Because that's where the engagement is, that's where that kind of like, that's where the money is essentially. So let's remember our System 2. Let's remember that we have it, that we can draw on it, and that it can help guide us, and that we can even maybe habituate ourselves into some better reactions if we find that we have some rough spots. All right, there you go. One more video, and we are there. See ya.